Welcome back to Afternoon Live. Experiencing sexual trauma of any sort can have lifetime effects on a person's self-confidence, health, and relationships. Here with tips on how to overcome the anguish, we welcome back certified trauma therapist Kayna Cassard. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this is such a hard topic to talk about, but so important because I'm sure there's more people than we realize that are suffering with this.
Yeah, some statistics say about 81% of women, 43% of men, and just over half of transgender and non-binary folks experience some form of sexual harassment or sexual assault. So yeah, really painful numbers and heartbreaking.
Yeah, and when we talk about sexual trauma, what are we actually talking about? Are there forms that we might not be aware of?
Yeah, there are. So there are the obvious forms where somebody maybe is overpowered or experiences something that they didn't or couldn't consent to. And then we call those big T traumas. Then there's also little t traumas, which might be something like chronic experience of an association that's negative or painful, whether physically or emotionally, such as sexual shame or conditions that cause pain during sex or pain with sex. Those are considered like little t traumas. And so those can be also just as impactful sometimes as a big T trauma, but we don't talk about those as much. Yeah. We don't realize that those are things that people do struggle with because it's not talked about as much.
Right, and you usually think of sexual trauma as being something, like you said, forced upon you or that you didn't consent to. Mm-hmm. But what about someone that might have been feeling guilt or regret over decisions they've made, whether they started into a sexual relationship too early or they had more partners than they had planned on having? Can all of those little things affect you later on in life?
Yeah, they can. When we get messages about sex, whether that's from parents, community, important organizations around us, those messages really sink in. And if the body doesn't feel like it can feel safe with those messages, and as like young people, how do we know how to like filter out what feels real and what's harmful or not? And so we can take those on as belief systems that tell us that this is how sex is supposed to be and how it's supposed to look. And if it happens in other ways, then it's bad or it's shameful or it's dirty. And those kinds of messages can cause the body to brace and experience sex or anything around sex, intimacy, dating. That can also cause a little bit of a trauma response in the nervous system because it's bracing against what they think is a bad situation.
So are those messages being formed in the brain as the assault is happening, or what is actually happening in the brain?
Yeah, when somebody experiences a trauma, whether it's sexual or any other kind of trauma, the brain starts to go into survival mode. And so we're familiar with like flight or fight response, and that is our body's way of helping us either get out of a situation or fight to save ourselves. And sometimes we're not able to complete that response. There are also two other forms, like freeze and fawn. So freeze is when somebody just totally freezes up like a deer in headlights and they don't move or they can't stop the situation. And then the fawning is where somebody is maybe people pleasing or trying to get on the good side of the perpetrator. And those can actually cause a lot of shame associated with it because they tell themselves like, this awful thing was happening, why didn't I do something about it? Why was I nice to this person? But really those are coping mechanisms in order to help ourselves feel safe in those situations. And so when those things happen, when any kind of trauma response happens, and if it doesn't feel like the person is able to complete the trauma response or get out of the situation, the brain starts to form a pathway that says anything that looks like, feels like, seems like, or is that person or around that person is now connected to a threat. So it's like this brain pathway of threat. And then even if the threat has passed, future times they might have that brain pathway get activated again. And so even, long after, they still might feel that in intimate situations.
So what are some paths to healing? What would be the next step?
Yeah, so there are two different thoughts or different paths about what could happen. Most people are used to talk therapy, where people are talking about the experience. And that can be really helpful for validation and learning more about themselves to reduce shame. But somebody might get stuck in their trauma in their body if they're not able to move it through with their body. So somatic therapies are like starting to come out in some emerging research. Yeah. It's been really amazing with EMDR, trauma resiliency model, somatic experiencing is really showing how to help the body rewire that pathway. So instead of it going from these things look like the trauma to threat, there's now alternative pathways to feeling more empowered and being able to live a more authentic life that aligns with how they want their intimate life to look like.
I feel like I keep seeing more and more about somatic healing, somatic experiencing online. Can you tell me briefly a little bit more about what that entails?
Yeah, so it's depending on which modality it is, the idea is being a body-centered, neuroscience-informed approach at re-experiencing what happened in the past and helping a person feel more neutral, more grounded, more empowered in the present so that the past doesn't hijack them as much as it did, by noticing sensations, doing different kinds of body movements, or doing bilateral stimulation to help the brain start to reorganize and rewire itself to feel safe again and to really embody that sense of safety and control.
Well, it's so important that people are taking the next step towards healing. Hopefully this will be inspiring for them to take that next step. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll have more information on our website at katu.com, and we'll have more information, and we'll be right back with more Afternoon Live right after this.